Right, I want us to go to Spice FM. They were earlier on talking to Dr. Chris Kipto. He's the Principal Secretary for National Treasury. The conversation was on fiscal consolidation for economic growth, focusing on the intricate balance. Let's listen in.
I had dryer to blow air through it.
Oh, wow.
Same effect.
In Kenya kupiga mdomo.
Yes, ndio hivyo.
Kupiga mdomo tu.
Unaongea
porojo bila anything. PS, you've been the PS for many years in government. You've served as PS for trade, for environment. You've acted as PS when others were not in office. And then now you are PS in the National Treasury. How do you compare the current posting to the previous ones?
This is the toughest of all the jobs I've ever had. And nothing comparable.
Both in private and public?
Yes, because this is just the entire life of, my entire life is just on this job. I begin at 5 a.m., sleep at 1 a.m. Most of the time, except probably the weekend.
By begin, you mean you're in the office at 5?
I'm in the office by 5.
And you leave the office?
Yes, even if I leave early, I'll still be working. And the earliest time I sleep is, midnight, 1 a.m. Every day, that's a job. And it is the busiest job. I hold the job of, I'm an accounting officer like other PSs for the National Treasury State Department. But I'm also the Principal Secretary for National Treasury. So I am in charge of both the national government, the parliament, judiciary, independent institutions, and I have to deal with all treasury issues relating to the entire government.
You're the one to disburse all the money that needs to be disbursed.
It's the job description of the Principal Secretary for National Treasury.
So one of them is, of course, making sure that we are paying our debt on time.
Yes.
Last week, the president, flanked by you and your cabinet secretary and others, announced to the country that we have dodged a bullet by floating Eurobond and getting $1.5 billion out of it. We have been able to pay $1.5 billion into the $2 billion bullet payment that's expected in June. The rest, $500 million, said was to come from other sources. What are these other sources?
Budget from our own domestic resources that we're going to collect from the Kenya Revenue Authority. And we expect that balance will be met. And so we are confident that we will settle the $2 billion by June.
Okay.
We already settled the $1.5 billion. And so the remaining is on course, and we will settle them on time.
Mm-hmm. And by on time, we mean by June?
By June, yes. Because we have a set timeline, and we endeavor all the time to honor our obligations. Just this Monday, we had to pay $152 billion debt obligations for the domestic debt. 107 billion, which was principal payments, and the balance being interest payments. And we do that every Monday because that is our day that we settle our domestic debt obligations. And we take this very seriously because dawa ya deni ni kulipa, and we have to make sure we honor our obligations, because if we fail, that will be really bad for our nation.
So it seems as though a lot, and not seems as though, it actually is the case, that a majority of the revenue that comes is going towards debt.
Yes.
Is this fiscally responsible?
Actually, the state of affairs right now is like this. For every 100%, every money that we receive from KRA, 60% will go towards settlement of outstanding debt obligations or the debt due. And the balance we have now to use it to meet recurrent expenditure, pay counties, let alone pay development budget.
Okay, so let's
this percentage seems to be a floating percentage. The president said 70%. You're saying 60. We've had another quarter 78%.
78%.
What exactly is it?
It all depends on the period that you use, because sometimes you could do an average of, say, last 5 years or last 1 year, or you just take today or yesterday. You look at the revenues that you had, and But I think on average, because they have done this analysis, on average, currently we are doing about 60% of whatever revenues we get. We settle our obligations, and if you do the breakdown of the budget, you will actually see that coming out very clearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, because of a majority of those funds going towards the first charge of debt, that means that you're left with very little for the rest of the responsibility that Treasury has for the country. That means we're talking about counties in devolution. That means we're talking about, budgets that needs to be filled. So many other things are necessary with the little money that's left. How is that juggling exercise going? It would appear that it seems to be a bit of a trouble spot.
It's a tough one. That's why I think I'm happy that you want us to discuss the subject on fiscal consolidation, because really that is what we are doing now. We don't have a choice. We have to ensure that we reduce our appetite for debt, because it's not sustainable. Currently, our debt is rated high risk but sustainable. And if you look at the debt carrying capacity of Kenya, the countries are rated either high, medium, or low. There are three categories. So in 2021, before 2021, we were high carrying capacity, but we've been now on medium, and we don't want to come to the worst category. So instead, we want to make sure that we work around to ensure that we actually work towards minimizing the need to take debt. And our idea is, if in the near future we can run a balanced budget, that will be the greatest aspiration that we'll have achieved. We're looking at moving from, I think 2019, 2018, 2019, our budget deficit as percent of GDP was around 7.1. Then the next year, 2021, we had 8.3%. 2022, 23 was 6.2%. When the last election, just before the election, the budget deficit was 6.2%. But because this government, when it came to power, it took the decision that it wants to engage in fiscal consolidation. The first supplementary that we undertook in October was to bring down the budget deficit as percent of GDP from 6.2% then to 5.7%. Then the budget that was passed by Parliament, which was read in June, brought the budget deficit to 4.4%. And the aspiration was that we move to around 3.9%, and over the medium term, work towards minimize, if not eliminating completely, the need to borrow. And unfortunately, of course, we got shocks that affected us. We had the pressure of the exchange rate. Our shilling has weakened. So the amount the loan that we have in foreign currency has meant that we now have to raise more shillings to pay for the same. And so we went for supplementary this year, last year actually in October, to correct for the fact that the expenditures had risen by about 148 purely because of changes in exchange rate and interest rate movements. That is why the budget deficit now moved from 4.4% to 5.5% of GDP.
It's only on account of the forex fluctuation.
Yeah, only on account of that, because we wanted to still maintain the target that we had set. So it moved by 1.1%, purely because of exchange rate and interest rate movements. Now, we are coming back in the next 1 month to another supplementary that aims to bring it down from 5.5% of GDP to 4.7% of GDP. And then you've seen that in the budget policy statement that we have now, we are moving back to 4.4% of GDP. And next year, we want to be at 3.9% of GDP. The whole idea is to try and really minimize. Because I think taking more debt means in a few years, instead of 60%, we're talking about 70, 80, and it is not going to be sustainable at all.
Okay.
So we really need to take that bold decision, and I think the debate is around how do you finance the budget? There are two ways. If you can finance a budget through revenues that you raise, if they are sufficient to cover the budget, then you don't need to borrow. But now, because we always are short of the revenues, then we have to borrow. So the balance is revenue, debt, and also expenditure. There is room also, instead of just focusing on raising expenditure, we also work on rationalizing the expenditure. It's not just revenue raising measures. It's also about expenditure, because I believe there is scope to still rationalize our expenditure and ensure that we have efficient expenditure. And I think this is the big debate that we have. And remember, the debt obligations we have, are historical. Like the Eurobond, which you asked, we have about $7.1 billion of Eurobond. $2 billion is coming to mature in June. Then we have another $900 million maturing in May 2027. We have another $1 billion maturing in February 2028. We have another $1.2 billion maturing in May 2032. We have another $1 billion that is maturing in February January 2034, and the last one of $1 billion maturing in 2048, February. So it's
and the new ones are starting to mature in 2029.
Yes, and you see, part of liability management now, that's how we managed on this Eurobond, is that we did a refinancing by settling, we did a buyback. We issued and also did a buyback. And the issuance now means that those ones will mature in 3 tranches. Instead, we wanted to avoid bullet payments like we have found ourselves where we have to raise $2 billion in one go, which is very, very difficult. It's not easy when we are struggling with other needs. So what we have done is that this $1.5 trillion will now, $1.5 billion will now mature in 3 tranches, 2029, 2030, 2031. And those are the times that we don't have maturing Eurobond, as I have already indicated.
I want to ask, I just want to ask, in this particular Eurobond that we are paying now, the $2 billion, the 2014 one. So when we went to the market in 2014 and got $2 billion, that's 200 billion Kenya shillings. Have you taken some time at the National Treasury to look where the money was spent? Or even if you look at the totality of the $7 billion Eurobond that we have borrowed so far in the last 10 years, can you tell us where the money has gone? Is there a direct allocation, and you say out of the 2 billion shillings, 200 billion shillings went into this particular project?
It is money is fungible. So when you get money, it all has to do with the fact that you are working within a year. So if you need to reflect now within the year, how did you use all the monies that you got? And I think I will want to look at it. The only thing I can say is that whatever was borrowed was within budget at that time. And so one has to see, I think these are the big question always around, how do we utilize the resources that we have?
So in this particular case, the $2 billion in 2014, what particular project had it been budgeted for, and was it utilized for those projects?
My understanding is that it was part of the budget deficit. So it was supposed to be borrowed to meet the funding at that time for the budget. I don't have the specific details on exactly why they went to borrow at that time. Perhaps maybe when you call me next time, I can come with some answers. But I know, just like now, we have a budget deficit that Parliament has approved, and we have a debt management strategy that we use that makes us to decide how do we borrow. Do we borrow externally or locally? But when we borrow, it is to meet the requirements of the budget. And mostly, it's development budget.
So, bearing in mind that it's development, so budget is approved by Parliament. And then there's an Appropriations Act that is assented to by President after going through Parliament. In the appropriations, every shilling is put into a specific vote.
Yes.
There is the recurrent, it goes into salaries and others.
Yes.
And then there's the development. And the deficit should go to development. When you borrow, rather, loans should go to development.
Not necessarily. It is just that you have a budget, like now of in this financial year, in this supplementary, we are saying our budget expenditure is 3.9 trillion. Our revenues are projected to be 3 trillion. So we have a budget deficit of about 881 billion shillings.
Yes.
Now we raise those resources, and once we have the 881 plus what we are raising from revenue from KRA of 3 trillion, then that is now appropriated accordingly.
So you're saying
So you don't borrow to say I want to borrow this for development for this, unless you are specific. Like for instance, we issue infrastructure bonds. Those are earmarked now for specific infrastructure projects that are identified by ministries. But otherwise, we just need to, because you cannot raise all the revenues.
Yeah.
You go to the market, you borrow. And you can borrow through domestic sources, or you borrow through external sources. External sources could be bilateral, it could be multilateral, or it could be commercial.
Yeah.
All this, when you get the money, you use it as appropriated by Parliament.
So it's possible that the Eurobond was used to pay salaries and to pay operations of government.
It is possible, but most of the time you want to use the ordinary revenues to settle issues such as the salaries that come in, because they become fast charged. So when we give it priority from our revenues, just like debt, we use a lot of the time monies that we get from our revenues to settle our debt.
Okay.
Yeah.
So most likely then, if that's not the most likely scenario, then the second most likely scenario is that the 2 billion shillings or the 7 billion shillings Eurobonds borrowed so far have gone to development. A majority of that money has gone to development.
It is a matter to confirm, but all I know is that money that you borrow could go to finance development projects. It could also finance recurrent expenditure.
But yes, I know you have not been in that ministry for long, but there are those who work under you who've been in the ministry for long. From what your interactions with them, when money comes and it's 7 billion shillings, this is close to $1 trillion shillings, $7 billion.
Yes, $1 trillion shillings.
This is $1 trillion, Bob.
Yes.
This trillion shillings over the 10 years, what project can we say, because of going to the market for expensive commercial debt, we built this dam, this road, we connected these people to electricity? Is it
it is possible to show, I believe, because there are many development projects that have been done over that 10 years. I think the only thing is that I don't have the facts with me today to say this amount.